Not yet. Oh, there we go. All right, we are recording. Go for it.
Cool. So this is going to be about radically increasing the resources you've got for creating cool melodies so that you never get stuck with, I don't really know what to do. So personally, I have a thing about my philosophy when it comes to writing music is that you don't want to be reaching for inspiration. You don't want to be like, what am I going to do? Your job as a songwriter is not to like try and strain for one little idea here and one little idea there. Your job is to choose between all the ideas that you've got. So it's actually easy to come up with ideas, and we're going to go over some ways you can do that. So you're never going to feel kind of like starved of inspiration, and you're going to have the enjoyable luxury of just deciding which of these different things best matches your intention for the song. So I'm going to share my screen again. There we go. Just a little, some of you have written loads of songs, some of you maybe haven't written quite so many. Although we're going to concentrate on melody, I'm just going to start by going over a little bit what your kind of the things that songs have in them. We've got the lyrics, got the melody, which is the tune that you can sing along to, and I'm going to be going more into that in a sec. And then we've got the harmony, which would describe the chords that you're using. And then you've got the form or the structure of the song. Does it have verses and choruses? Does it have, what are the sections in it? How many times do they come in and out? Then you've got what rhythm and what tempo. Is it an upbeat song? Is it a slow ballad? Does it have like a ska rhythm? Does it have a disco rhythm? And then you've got the texture, which is how many instruments or sounds are in there at any one time. So typically, if you listen to a song, there'll be some points where there are loads of instruments, some points where there are not very many instruments. Even if you're a performer with one instrument and you're solo with a keyboard or a guitar, there are still ways that you can exploit texture. So each of those headings is really interesting to think about. And when you've written a song and you're in the stage of polishing it, it's really nice to review the song from the perspective of the lyric, from the perspective of the chords. Am I really happy with the structure? Could I do anything else with the rhythm that supports the song? But because we're going to focus mainly on melody today, I'm going to refrain from talking too much about them, just so that you start to get a little idea of how to think about your songs holistically. So you could think of all of those little headings as dials or controls that are going to affect, I've got a silly flicker that comes up on my screen, that affect what your song is like. And if you had one chord progression, some songs are structured with one repeating chord sequence that goes round and round the song. And if there's one variable that's staying the same, you probably want the other variables to change. So just like we've got these different dials here, you can think about the lyric, the tune, the rhythm, the harmony, the texture as being things that you can alter as you go through the song to keep it interesting. So that's just a little overview. I know it's pretty quick, but those are all areas of songwriting that you can start developing as you go along. Coming to melodies. Now, I'm sure that nobody needs to be persuaded of the value of a good melody, but basically a strong melody is going to make your songs addictive to people who listen to them. They're going to want to hear them again and again and again. They're going to, if you want to get your music licensed, or you want to work in jingle writing or anything like that, being able to write something that communicates very strongly is very useful. And if you think about your own favorite songs, probably they've got some quite distinctive melodies. You could probably hum them to me and I would be able to recognize them just from the melody without even the words or the chords or anything like that. So writing strong melodies and knowing how to kind of generate ideas for writing strong melodies is going to make you a captivating performer and an in-demand writer. Plus, it feels really good to sing a melody that you love. So those are some reasons why it's worth investing a little bit of time in thinking about developing a melody writing skill. It used to be, when I was at music college, there would be people that said, oh, well, so-and-so, just having a knack for melody is such a great thing, as if it was a strange quality like unicorn dust that you either had or didn't have. But I promise you, everyone can get better at writing melodies. So I'm interested in how you write melodies at the moment, or how you wrote melodies when you started out. if you're anything like most people, you probably, like, for example, when I started writing songs, I just was playing my guitar and I'd be like, la 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 la. You know, you're just sort of coming up with something a little bit without a plan. You're just experimenting, and you can find something you like and you're like, oh, I quite like that. That sounds all right. Does that reflect, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second. Does anyone kind of relate to that? Does that reflect how some of you started writing melodies?
I was going to say, I always started with a chord progression, like, and then I felt totally stuck because I always built the chord progression first. And I used to work with another songwriter that just wrote her melodies like completely off instrument, and they were great. And I was jealous of her because I didn't know how to do that.
Yeah,
Wow.
and mine comes in my mind just with my, you know, I record it, and it's just about when I am in very hard emotions, the melodies come to my mind, and I just do it with my mouth and sound.
Cool. So, you know, it's great to have these different, let me share my screen again, go back to my, it's great if you already have an idea of how you go about writing melodies. And there's nothing wrong with just writing them off the top of your head, however you write them at the moment. There's nothing wrong with playing a chord progression and humming until you find something you like. There's nothing wrong with any of that. It's just that if you only have one way of writing melodies, it can become repetitive, because in the long run, you might not always, if you're constantly sort of drawing from the same type of source and you're never putting new vocabulary in, eventually it's going to be difficult to come up with something that's new. Because it's like opening your kitchen cupboard and making something from the ingredients that are in there. If you're never putting new ingredients in there, everything is going to taste of tarragon and nutmeg, because you're just putting the same stuff in your writing. So, and also, if you want to commit to writing songs or being involved in music in the long term, you need a way of doing things that gives you several different approaches. Otherwise, it's limiting. And so there's nothing wrong. You can certainly write a cool melody that way, the way that you already do it, or the way that I just described, but it's worth developing some more ways of doing it. So I promise you there isn't very much music theory. Some of you might already know this. So if you imagine the major scale that a lot of Western music is based in, the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, you know, everyone recognizes that. If I were to count up with numbers instead and go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, everyone's waiting for the 1. So that's already in your ears and in your kind of musical perception from just the music that you would have heard growing up. And, you know, wherever you are in the world, you'll have heard music that works in this way. So just briefly, if we look at the little sequence of numbers, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. If I take the number 1, the first note, the third note, and the fifth note, and I play them at the same time, that's where I'm going to get my standard major chord from. And the notes, those notes that are in the chord, those 3 notes, are called the chord tones. And if I sing one of those notes while I'm playing the chord, let's say, if I sing any of those notes, sounds like it fits. So another way of describing that sound is it's consonant. If I sing some of the other notes from the scale against that chord, they're all going to have a slightly different feeling. Now, there's just because it doesn't sound quite as consonant as the chord tones, doesn't mean it's going to be wrong, but it has a different character. So for example, let's say note number 2. A bit more jazzy. Changes the character a little bit. If I sing note number 4, that is a little bit, can be a little bit dissonant. After a while, you're like, please just go.
Resolve it already.
Yeah. Ow. So that's just a very quick demonstration that depending what chord you're playing, there's a fairly predictable way that the numbers from that scale are going to sound. If you've already seen this before and you already know what I'm talking about, maybe this is a slightly different way of thinking about it. If you've never thought about this before, don't worry about understanding it right now, this moment. It's something you can return to, and you don't need to understand it to use what's coming next. But so if you want to create a sound that's really, really fitting with a chord, just pick a chord tone. If you want a sound that's more dissonant, you can try one of the other notes, and eventually you'll be able to recognize just by hearing them what type of relationship is happening between the notes. So moving on from that small bit of music theory. Oh, where are we? That's it. No more theory needed. When you make a melody by humming along to a chord progression, you're probably instinctively going to be gravitating towards the chord tones anyway. And there might be some passing notes in between from the scale. And this is fine, and it can produce good results, but it can also result in what I would call the kind of the most common melody writing problem, which is sort of melodies that aren't bad sounding, but they're just a bit not that exciting. So what I mean by that, I'm gonna just show you my guitar again. Let's say I'm just gonna play like an A chord and a D chord. And let's say I don't have any plan. I'm just gonna hum something with I'm just gonna think of something that I think sounds like it doesn't clash. Actually, I happen to pick a note that works fine in both chords. Now it's completely flat. That's not a very good melody. Even if I change notes and I go, it's okay. It doesn't sound bad, but it's not that exciting. So the drawback of only having the technique of playing chords and thinking of something over the top is that if you imagine a melody as going up or down, it can be quite sort of flat and go up and down a little bit, but not be that memorable. So what you can do to avoid that happening to you is to think about the shape of the melody. So if the melody if you were going to draw the melody, and you don't need to be able to write music or sight music or anything to do this, you can just think of the notes going up or down. What direction would it take? What would it look like? So you can try this out at home just now. I'll play a couple of chords, and you can improvise a melody that, just challenge yourself to improvise a melody that has an arc shape. So you're going to start low, you're going to go up, and you're going to come back down. So I'm going to come back to, I'm just going to give you a couple of chords. Can everyone hear the chords a little bit? You don't have to be, it doesn't have to sound great. You can just be like, So I didn't plan that. I sang kind of a bum note. But this is not about sounding great. It's just about starting to explore slightly differently. So I'm going to play that and just have a little go at this at home for yourself. You're just trying to imagine a melody that goes up and comes back down. And just see how it makes it different than what you normally do. Anyone have a go at that? Did you do that at home? Or did you just watch me strumming? Okay, I hope you did that at home. So it might feel like a weird thing to do if you're used to, especially if you don't like making bum notes. You have to make peace with singing bum notes when you do this, because when it starts coming out, you might be like, ah. That doesn't matter. This is getting you to explore much more what's inside each possible chord progression. So that was an arc starting low and going high. Of course, you can do the other type of thing. And, maybe some of them are not going to sound that great either, but you're probably going to find some different possibilities than you would have found otherwise. Does that make sense? And is this something people have maybe tried out before already?
So are you suggesting that they only go stepwise or half stepwise and not like doing jumping intervals when they're trying this?
You can jump intervals. I think you can basically, you can just have it like you're going to start from a lower note, go high, and come back down. If you want to do it in little steps, you can, or you can be like, so the overall shape is like that. But obviously that's not the only overall shape. You can also start in a line and kind of come down like that. You know, you might want to find slightly better notes than that, but
so I'm guessing that what you're trying to get them to do is get out of their comfort zone of doing the same thing, and maybe within that finding a note that like, wow, that sounds cool with that chord, and then maybe you didn't like how you got to that note, but you can change that.
Absolutely. And the best way to do this is to give yourself like a minute or two on each chord, on each pair of chords, so that you really get to kind of get used to what's coming next, and you explore it, and you start because if we're playing a chord progression that has 4 chords or 6 chords, we can be inclined to not really milk the possibilities of each chord. So it's just getting you to go a little bit more into detail and try out some different kind of provocations. And I think one of the things that's important is to embrace things sounding bad on the way to them sounding good. Because if you only do things that sound nice, like that sound perfectly consonant, then you're going to miss out on some kind of thing which maybe your first attempt at it was like, but then you're going to find some very cool lick in there that you wouldn't have found in any other way.
Right. And I think the other thing I see too is that you're not just sticking with the rhythm you're not just moving with when the chord moves. You know, you're trying to find some different rhythm or more notes within each chord instead of just kind of da, 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 you know what I mean?
Exactly. Instead of kind of getting into the flat thing.
Yeah.
So within that, there's loads of other little kind of briefs you can set yourself. So you can be like, oh, I'm not going to start on beat 1. I'm going to start on beat 2. Or I'm going to start on the and of 2, by which I mean the half beat after 2. So 1. And all of those things change how it's going to sound. And we all have kind of habits that we naturally gravitate to. So doing something to interrupt your normal habits is going to give you loads more creative options. So that was, I'm going to go, there's a few more shapes you can try out. And
I have a question. When you do this, do you like set something to record? Because sometimes you'll just be messing around and you'll catch something that's gold and then you will forget it.
Absolutely. It's a great idea to set something to record. This is also something that you can do on your instrument. You don't have to be a very advanced player to pick out some single notes if you recorded a chord backing. And sometimes if you're mainly a singer, it's interesting to write a melody on an instrument and vice versa. So there are, you know, we just talked about going up and coming down or starting high and coming low. But there are loads of different, here are a few other ideas for you. If you start on a static melody, even though I just talked about how flat melodies were kind of boring, they don't have to be if you've decided to be static because you're going to move elsewhere, or if you're making rhythm be a very important part of what's happening. For example, the song, Billy Joel song, that kind of We Didn't Start the Fire.
Oh yeah.
It just has rhythm as the main kind of hook of the melody there. Or Taylor Swift song Blank Space, new suit, do, I can read you like a magazine, all that's on one line, one note, but it's super rhythmic. And then she goes up later she contrasts that with movement later on when she gets to the chorus. So there's doing things statically but using rhythm. There's going up, like, you know, the first Noel, the melody literally just goes straight up major scale, do 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 do, and then back down. You might not want to just go up and down the scale because it can sound a little predictable, but we're going to come to some ways to make that not be predictable in a second. Then we've got descending tunes that come down. Sweet Home Alabama, just very simple but pretty effective. An arc shape where you go up and down, but you end on a different note than the one you started from, like the riff from the MGMT song, do, 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 do. It kind of finishes halfway down. I don't know if you remember that song, but it was a very catchy riff. An inverted arc, like baby, you're a firework. Varied shapes and mix them up. So you can have a zigzag, to have two arches, to have, and I think these don't have to be exact. You know, it's just a nice way of interrupting. It's a nice interruption to what you normally do and a way of adding to your normal habits. So you can use your instrument, you can sing, you can compose with a voice. You'll start to notice that some feel really weird because you never use them. And it also helps you extract maximum juice from each chord rather than needing to constantly add new chords to provide momentum, even though it's nice having cool chords as well. But so that's one approach, is to just start thinking more in shapes. Another approach is to think about what your lyric is. So speech has its own rhythm and its own pitch. If we describe somebody as monotonous, it's usually not a compliment. So if you take an important lyric in your song and you pretend that you're an actor and you sort of proclaim the line, it will have its own places where it rises and falls. And you can use that as a starting point for taking the melody up and down in a way that fits the flow of the lyrics. Again, it just gives you a different starting point. Another thing you can do is think about the pitch range. So we've, in a sense, covered this by talking about starting low to high, going with the shapes and the going up and down with pitch. But another thing you can do is confine something to a pitch range for one bit of the song and then move to a different pitch range for a different part of the song, or a later line. You know, you could start a verse in one place, and then you could move up a little bit, and then you can move up a little bit for the chorus. No doubt many of you do this anyway. The increase in sort of a sense of dynamic that playing with pitch range produces means that there's tons and tons of songs that do this. They'll have a verse that's in the lower pitch range, and then the chorus will be higher.
You know who does this really well is Kelly Clarkson. If you listen to her, like, she'll start low, like super low, because she's got a huge range. So she can be like low in the verse and then full voice in the chorus, and and then she'll like go in, the verse will be low, and then halfway through she'll jump up the octave because she can. But it's really does add to the dynamics of the song.
Yeah, even if it's kind of, in a way, some of these things might seem to be mechanical, but they do work, and you don't need to do something in a recipe way to, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to use it in a really contrived way and keep it. You can use it and just decide whether it serves your purpose for the song or serves your intention for the song. It's one of my pet peeves that some pop songs use this in a slightly unimaginative way. They'd be like, la 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 in the verse, and they'll be la la la. They'll just take the same thing and sort of boost it up an octave. I'm like, come on, give us something a little bit more interesting than that. However, you can use it in an interesting way, and you can also exploit the expectation that you might go up by doing the opposite. Here we go. Another thing you can do that's really, really effective, because whilst you don't want to get boring with your melody, you want the song to have a certain flow to it. So you want it to make sense from one bit of the song to another bit. And if I'm starting off and I go la 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 la, suddenly I kind of interrupted the flow a little bit there, and that's going to disrupt enjoyment of the song. So you want to have enough kind of connection between ideas that there's a flow from one part of the song to another part. So one of the ways you can effectively do this is to use motifs and variations. So again, this counts as another kind of provocation. A motif can be very, very simple. And I actually, when you come to exploring this, I recommend giving yourself some restrictions. So it's going to be a 3-note motif, or I'm not allowed more than 5 notes, or because again, you'll start doing things a little bit differently when you set yourself restrictions. So, for example, let's say that I was going to come up with a 3-note thing. Da, 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 And it can be that simple. So I've got 3 notes, da da da. And then the ways that I could develop that, I could take the idea up a few notes. Da da da. And you'll hear lots of songs do this. They take one little idea, and then as the song goes on, they take the same little idea and they'll just move it up in pitch a few notches. And there's a song out by the band Train, and it's called Play That Song. And he uses the melody from Chopsticks.
Oh yes, I've heard that.
Play that song, the one that makes me dance all night long. That one. And you can hear it. It's just a da 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 da. All he's done is taken that exact same idea and moved it up. But it you know, it feels great. There's connection. It's a very popular melody. You can turn the idea upside down. So if you were like da da da, it could be da da da. You can keep the rhythm the same but change the notes. You can keep the notes the same but alter the rhythm. So da da da. You know, and those things might seem. You can also tie them into words that you want to emphasize. So there could be a long note on a word that wants more emphasis than the same word had in the sentence before, or depending where the word that you really want to draw attention to is positioned in the line. You can add notes to the original idea, so you just make the idea a little bit longer. But what this means is that there ends up being coherence between what happens as a song develops. And it also means that you really explore and develop an idea before moving on to the next idea, all of which is pleasing for the listener. So another very cool thing you can do is use sequences. Sequences are found everywhere in melodies that you're going to hear in songs. And a sequence is just a pattern of notes that repeats. So what we just heard in Chopsticks, that was a little sequence. Da 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 da. It's just a little pattern that repeated in a different place. And if we had an exactly predictable sequence, that would become quite boring. So, you know, if we had by the time I get to the top, you know what's happening, so it's kind of become boring. But if I use just a little bit of that, that sounds quite nice. So you don't necessarily want to use a sequence. You know, if it's too long, it's going to become predictable and it's become boring. But using a little bit of a sequence as part of a bigger melodic shape is really cool. So I don't know if you know the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby. Eleanor Rigby, da 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 da. That's a great use of the sequence. So catchy. Lives in a dream, waits at the window, reading the na 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 na. It's not boring because it's interrupted by other things, but it comes back and it's got this cascading downwards feeling. That downwards cascade or movement really kind of like emphasizes the sad feeling of the song. Okay, so this might not be the hippest example, but Gloria, you know, the carol Ding Dong Merrily on High, big sequence there. If you get into doing this and you want to improve your singing and playing different scale sequences is also really, really good for being able to improvise, write melodies, and play cool solos. And you can sequence any scale. So, you know, you can take different scales, have different personalities. It's really worth getting into a few of, you know, some scales have an exotic sound. You don't need to know too much about theory to understand why this is or to be able to use them. I'm not going to get into that just now because it would be a little bit tangent. But, you know, it's well worth looking into a few different scales, even if you don't necessarily perceive yourself as being academic in your interest in music. So one of the coolest things is the last, save the best for last, the never heard before note. Okay, then you might be able to come up with a snappier title for it. But what I mean by that is a note that comes into the melody that we haven't heard before. So, and this is particularly useful for, again, giving emphasis to an important part of the song. And you can start to think of the melodic phrases that you're writing as having, you know, what's the climactic note? What's the most important part of the phrase for you? And what note are you going to do to emphasize it? I was just working out whether Eleanor Rigby used a never before note, but I don't think it does. So essentially, that would be sometimes the most important word or the most important note is at the end of the line. Maybe it's at the end of the line. Sometimes it might be at the beginning. If it's at the end of the line or it's at the beginning of the chorus, that's a great time to pull out a new note that we haven't heard yet, because it keeps things interesting. So, and again, a lot of you might be using some of these techniques instinctively in your writing, but it's helpful to know what your options are. So in the example of the Taylor Swift song or the Billy Joel song, both of them had this rhythmic kind of quite single note oriented verse line. And then they use both pitch range and the new note idea when they get to the chorus. And that just keeps it really interesting for the listener. You don't just have to use it in the chorus. You could use it in a B part of a verse. You could use it in a middle eight or a new piece of musical material. So I'll just, I put a little bit more on that slide. I don't want to confuse things, so I'm aware I'm giving you quite a few different techniques. But basically, if you think again about the notes we had in our chord, notes 1, 3, and 5, those notes and all the other notes and all the other numbers in the sequence, they all have a definite personality when you hear them against the chord. Notes 1 and 5 are quite stable. Note 3 is stable and typically kind of very sweet sounding. Note 4 is a bit tense. So if I wanted to create a phrase over a C chord and I disallow myself from using note 3 until the end, when it comes in, it's just going to sound great because we haven't heard it yet, and that particular note's really juicy. So you can just give yourself certain notes that you're allowed by picking them out on the piano or the guitar, and experiment with going to a new note at an important part of your lyric. Now, just because it can be, when you're used to doing things in a certain way, you need a strong reason if you're going to bother getting a new habit. So I think there's a lot of good reasons for getting some more perspectives on how you're writing melodies. And this little list is just what we talked about over the last half hour. So we've got improvising over chord pairs with your voice, trying out different melody shapes, using the lyric to suggest a melody shape, playing with a pitch range, creating a motif and seeing how you're going to vary it, using sequences, using a note we haven't heard yet. And obviously, you know, the best melodies are going to combine these different ideas so that it's not just one theme throughout the song. So when it comes to making it usable, the disincentive to doing this is that essentially it kind of feels less groovy than just playing chords and singing. There's something pleasurable and a little bit cathartic about not thinking too hard about what you're doing and just going by instinct. And especially if you started writing songs that way, like I did, it's totally different becoming more, in a way, academic about it. And it can seem a bit boring. Like, well, I don't really want to do this. I want to just do it the way I normally do it. So, of course, you need to, in a way, bridge the gap between the pleasurable feeling of emotional release or connection that you can get when you're just experimenting and the slightly more technical approach of like, oh, well, I'm going to let myself have notes 1, 5, and 6, and then I'm going to see what happens if I go to note 3 at the end. I get that is not quite the same. You have to get your pencil and paper out. You have to figure out what the notes are. It's all a bit more of a business than just being like, la, 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 la. But it really is worth it, because if you're into songwriting for the long haul and you only have one way of writing melodies, there comes a point where you're going to be drawing on the same stuff all the time, and you need a way of giving yourself new vocabulary. So I get that the reason I'm making explicit what one of the barriers to actually using any of this stuff might be is because it involves you moving from one mode of exploring and connecting with music to a different one. But the benefits of making that transition are that you're never going to have no possibilities. You're never going to be like, I don't know, I'm not feeling that inspired today. You know, you're always going to have things that you can try out. You cannot fail to generate material if you say, okay, I'm going to find a sequence and I'm going to end on note 2, or I'm going to try a descending line and then I'm going to use rhythm. You're just always going to generate stuff. And what's more is that you won't become kind of a parody of yourself. I think a lot of people, when they're first starting out, this happened to me, they just come out with stuff spontaneously. And if people like it, it's really exciting and satisfying. And in my case, my chord choices tended to be, I didn't realize they were unusual at the time, but other people found them kind of like unusual to the point of saying they were a bit proggy. I didn't even know what prog was at that point, but if you keep doing the same thing and you get like, well, this is the kind of thing that I do, you can't afford to get invested in that, because that is going to make you stagnate creatively. You're going to get maybe 1, 2, 3 albums out of that, and then you'll be like, then you're going to be trapped. I'm not saying this to be negative. I'm just saying this because it's, you want to be able to kind of keep growing and developing as a songwriter and musician. So that is why it's normal that using these things won't feel the same as just vibing with yourself, but it's worth persevering through that. The other thing to think about is that whilst it's really important to not be invested in every single thing you do being good, it's much more important to be productive, because that's how you generate enough material that you can make good quality decisions. As you go on with songwriting, you depending what sort of person you are, you might need to develop your own ideas about creativity and your own creativity. For me, it would be kind of unsatisfying if I was still doing this after 10 years or whatever, and I didn't have any personal philosophy or any personal ideas about creativity. And for me, one of the biggest ones is that it's about the quality of the decision making. So if you think about the Sistine Chapel or any great work of art, it's not that the artist was like, I had this amazing movement of my arm and I created something fabulous. It's that there was consistently high quality decision making throughout about where to position things, when a thing was finished, when, how this thing related to that thing. And in terms of your ongoing development as a songwriter, you also want to be able to elevate the quality of your decision making. And the only way you can do that is if you have things to choose between. If you settle for the first thing that vaguely is okay, then you can't really say that that's going to be the highest quality decision. It might be awesome. Sometimes it will be great and it will work out. But it won't always, if that's all you've got to go on, it won't really always be the best possibility. And if you write loads of material, loads of melodies using these things, and 9 of them are not very good and 1 of them is amazing, it was worth doing. So that's just a little bit of an argument in favor of starting to become deliberate about developing your own ideas about creativity and your own ideas about what a creative practice looks like for you. Getting you might not get great results straight away, but it's not so much about your immediate result as about you building a machine for yourself to create good output. Don't get hung up on trying to write great melodies straight away. Embrace the failures. So I just want you to enjoy this. Hopefully you've got a whole lot of new ways to think about melody. Even if you take one of these and apply it that you didn't apply it before, your melody writing is going to be enriched. Another very cool way to use this information is to think about your favorite songs and try to see what is in those melodies. And it doesn't really matter whether the person that wrote that song was thinking in this way when they wrote the song. If you realize that your 3 favorite songs all have melodies that do a certain thing, you're like, okay, I connect really strongly with that particular thing. Maybe I'm going to use that next time I write a melody. So that is the end of the material that I've got. I'd love to hear any questions, any reflections, any contributions on how you go about writing melodies right now, any issues you've got.
Okay, I have a couple questions, but I'm going to let everybody else ask theirs first. But I just want to say, I remember hearing when I was younger that Bruce Springsteen wrote he was asked to write 50 songs for Born in the USA, and they would choose the best 10 or whatever is on that album. And that made all the difference, because if you listen to that album, every song on that album is strong. And that's
Oh,
because,
filler, no filler.
what? Yeah, no filler. Absolutely no filler on that album. And that's why it was huge. And, he put in the work. I don't know what happened to those other 40 songs. Maybe he used them later, he used pieces of them, but maybe he had to go through those other 40 songs to get to the 10 amazing songs. So you guys ask me questions,
yeah,
and I will then chime in with a couple things I thought of. You can just come on video or just start talking if you're muted.
Well, I'm just looking forward to trying them out. Although in my business plan, I have to leave songwriting behind if the goals that I've just done.
That's always a bummer, but you can always watch this later in the academy and go back over these again.
However,
days, right?
Yes, the reminder of having lots of songs for an album. I'm planning to hopefully record an album in the spring, and in between, I'm hoping to take a songwriting workshop at BAMPS at one of our art centers here. So thinking about having 40 songs and choosing 10 for an album. Anyway, this is great. And I hope to maybe teach some of this to a songwriting group that I coordinate here in Regina. So thanks so much. Gives lots of ideas, because I just write melodies instinctively, for sure. There's not been much other thought about that. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Anybody else? I'll give it a second.
Thank you very much for the information. I just see that you give us all the technical, information for some of us like me that do this intuitively. Basically, what I do normally is to decide what I want to speak about it, read about, have information, and create my own thoughts. I make a rainstorm of words. And I'm guided by the sounds of my language, I found music in the words. But yeah, it's beautiful. And I just learned a lot of other ways, the ways that you do it. And I'm for sure when I will be in front of my program, I will be applying, especially the shapes, is something that it will be something new for me. And basically, take this intuitive way to make art, to make it more perfect. So we don't go in, when we don't commit mistakes just because we don't have the experience, or we don't know, or we know that it's weak, some part of the song, but we don't know why.
But we can't identify why. We're what's the problem here? Yeah.
But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I record the audio, I took notes, and soon I will be also putting together all my songs again, and I am remaking some of them. Like I'd say, I am no musician, so it's kind of funny the way that I do it, because it's with my voice recorder, and I start to gracias, Padre por mi vida. That is that sequence. I am very, very stuck to the sequence, and I need to start to build things more professional. But I know that the talent is there. I just need to be more technical a little bit.
I think that's a really good point. That you're stuck on seconds. So next time you write a melody, make yourself not use any seconds and see what happens. Okay. And that you may put seconds in later, but it would be an interesting exercise.
Okay. Thank you. I will.
Anybody else want to come on screen and ask a question? I didn't see anything in the chat unless anything popped up in the last 5 minutes. I wanted to ask Diana, are there any of these tools that you gave us that don't work for certain genres or are specific for certain genres? Because like you said, your sound has kind of focused on the prog rock or alternative pop. When I listen to your music, that's what I think. And is that because of the choices that you're making, or just because of the chords you're using or the sound of your voice, or what is? making you sound like that and then making Carlene sound like folk? And, you know, is it just your personality or is it something about the melodies?
I think actually with me, it's more about the chords, because that might be a bit of a non-answer because clearly the melodies are related to the chords, but I don't think these, I think these could apply to any genre, because you can discard any result. If you got something out of this that you thought was, well, this kind of sounds like opera and that's not really what I'm doing, just don't use that idea. There'll be other stuff that you come up with that will be compatible with your genre. So I think these are pretty open ideas, and you don't need to know a great deal about theory to implement them. Although it is, I'd say, really fun as a songwriter to start getting a little bit more into what a third sounds like, or, you know, that's useful stuff, but you don't necessarily need to know it just to start thinking differently. Was that a good answer? Not really.
No, like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about it. Like if I think about, you know, pop usually doesn't use a lot of minor. It doesn't, you know, I'm just trying to think of like what would be different in a pop melody. Like is a folk melody just a lot more simple, and is an alternative melody, does it use a lot more intervals?
Maybe, but if you felt like something didn't match the musical mood, let's say you used a sequence and you were like, well, I don't really think that sounds like it would fit in this song. It doesn't mean that doing that another time wouldn't give you something that would fit in that song. So I think, you know, pop has a lot of sequences in it, you know, especially sort of major pentatonic stuff. It's possible that there would be things that might not work in certain genres, but I don't think that anything would definitely not work. I mean, do you think? Or is there anything? I don't know.
You know, I like your idea of listening to your 3 favorite melodies, and they'll probably be in the genre that you're in, you know, and analyzing them. Like, oh, look, they sequence. Oh, they like to use these intervals, or they, you know, they use this kind of motif. And then, you know, don't copy that, obviously. That's, I think, the hardest part too, is not to mistakenly copy. I remember Michelle was talking about how one time she was doing a licensing thing, and she didn't realize that she had like totally copied a melody of one of her favorite songs, and it didn't even occur to her until someone said, you know, this sounds exactly like blah, blah, blah. And she's like, oh, crap, yeah. I didn't mean to do that. So, well, yeah, it's hard to like analyze and listen and try to be similar yet not copy.
But if you know what, if you've got a way of thinking about what they're doing, then you can use similar techniques, but it's going to give you a different result. Right.
Yeah. So I think that's great. Like then, you know, try to completely rid yourself of exactly what that sounds like and just use the techniques in an academic way, you know, like you said, but it doesn't feel academic, but you're being very deliberate about it.
Yeah. I think it's just bringing more, I think the interesting thing about creativity and your creative development is that if you only have the stuff that you have when you start out with, your ability to be deliberate suffers.
Right.
And bringing more and more intention to what you're doing is, I think, how you're going to come up with just going further and deeper than maybe you can at the start.
Yeah, I think that's really what makes us more of an artist than just somebody that's acting on a whim, you know, that we're actually working hard to craft what we're making instead of just like whatever comes out.
Yeah. And it's absolutely not to say that you might not, something brilliant might come out. But there's also the more ingredients that you put into yourself by doing this type of work, the more stuff there is to draw upon spontaneously.
Yeah, I love that analogy of like what's in your cupboard, because we need to go shopping in the Melody toolkit.
Yeah.
Just use the same stuff that we always had in our cupboard, because like you said, everything will taste like, what did you say? Nutmeg and something else. Like, I think that's very funny and very poignant of an analogy. So my other question was, how do you get out of being stuck on, so you say you create a melody and then like you ask somebody to critique it and then they say, well, I like this and I like this, but you know, your pre-chorus is just totally flat, or it just doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't seem like it fits. But you've played this song over and over so many times that you're just stuck on that melody and you're thinking, how can I change this? Like, it's just going to sound weird to me if I make a new melody here, but I know I need to. I know I've been in this position lots of times when I knew I needed to edit a song, and I just had a really hard, I felt like, oh, I just need to go get a co-writer to come in and change this part because I'm so stuck in this. Do you have any suggestions on how to do that?
Yeah, what I would do for that is I'd just take the chords, I'd take them out on their own, and I would, let's say that there were 4 chords. I might record them kind of like round and round, and I'd view it as a completely different entity. So maybe I'd have a little note, a little written down where I finished, what the mood was when I finished the last section and what the mood was going to be in the next section. And I would decide whether I wanted there to be an interruption or a sort of flow. Some songs, they benefit from like a bit of a radical, whoa, there's a big drum fill and then there's a stop and it's dramatic. And then I would challenge myself to come up with between 5 and 10 alternatives. Because if you absolutely have to, and if I was stuck on the words having a certain melody, then I would forget about the words and I would just do it with my voice on R, or with, you know, with a guitar or a little keyboard or something, and just pick something out. And I would just run some of these ideas. If there was some kernels, so if there was something strong in the rest of the song that I liked, maybe it was a sequence, maybe it was a certain note, then I could use that as a little reference. So I could maybe develop that idea using some of the kind of motif variation things. Or I might just start something that's completely not necessarily inspired by what came before, what came after. But because you know what comes before, what comes after, probably you will make some connections anyway without doing it on purpose. And if you do that and you just force yourself to come up with at least 5 variations or at least 10 variations, and you're not looking for the first one you do to be perfect, that ends up generating its own momentum, and it kind of interrupts where you were before. But it does take the little inner you that's like, it takes the other you to be like, come on now, I'm gonna do this. First one, second one. So that's what I would do in that situation. And sometimes you need to come back to something. Some people really like listening to a song that they love as a sort of mind palate cleanser to get them out of their mode that they were in when they got stuck.
That's a good point. Like putting swishing water in your wine glass before you go on next. Tasting. That's a great idea. Get totally out of that song mindset, and then don't go back into that mindset. Just go with the chords of that section.
Just like these are some chords. Yeah.
But
it does take, there is resistance, which is why I was like, why would you not do this? You would not do this. It's kind of hard work. You have to concentrate a little bit, and that's a different mind space, and it can feel not as cool or not as fun.
Oh yeah. I mean, I know that when I finished a song, I'd be like, okay, this is done. Like, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. And that was a big thing. When I, listened to stuff by Jason Blum, like, he's like, you are not done. Like, do you want this song to be mediocre? Then you're done. But if you wanted to actually go somewhere in the world, you can't be done. Like, if someone says this needs work, you need to work on it. I don't care if you think you're done. Okay, does anyone else have any more questions before we close this out? This has been so great. I think that, people will go back and watch this and grab all these kernels of things in the toolkit that they can use, because
can I ask one?
Cool.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd look forward to hearing them.
Can I ask one other question about motifs?
Yeah.
So, is there I've listened to one other songwriter, and I can tell he's using a motif, and I've been listening to him trying to think about how to do that in my own music. Can you repeat, is there sort of, you shouldn't repeat them too many times, or, I don't know, I think about motifs, I think about Bach right away, but because I have classical background, but is there any other things about the motif and how to use it in a song?
Well, I think in terms of how many times to repeat it and how to stop it getting boring.
Yeah.
I think you'll know if it's got boring. So, you'll know when you listen to it, whether it's satisfying to hear it again, or whether you're like, oh, it's listening again. And if you want to, if you want to bring it back in but you don't want it to get boring, you can have a different musical section. And I've just been teaching some of my songs Dock of the Bay, and that's got that kind of classic Motown-y type of that era structure of verse chorus, middle eight, verse chorus. In the middle eight, just right at the end, it brings in this F chord that we never heard before until that point, and it just sets us right back in to come back. Sounds so cool. So if you're worried about something becoming boring, you can try and develop the idea and change it around, or flip it, or move it up, or move it down, or have it played by a different instrument, or bring it back in with a harmony, or alter it in some way. But you can also put another little bit of musical material before it, so that when it comes back in, we're like, oh, there's our old friend back again. Good to see you.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about Firework, I was thinking about that motif, and they do use that same motif a lot, but they vary. So it's like da 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 da, like it goes up and then it goes down.
Yeah.
And then they go da 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 so they throw that in there, and then you're not bored of it the next time they bring that back.
And they've obviously got their big bag of pop production.
Right, that helps.
Well.
But yeah,
cool.
I just think it's really useful to listen to some songs, because I hadn't really thought about that. Okay, how many times do they bring that back? It's actually quite a lot. But for some reason we're not bored. So why are we not bored? And then you think about, okay, well, they put this other little part in the middle, and it's like differently rhythmically. The da, da, da is like, oh, it totally like snaps you out of that. Like, oh, I know what's coming next.
Yeah, absolutely. The first bit of the melody is really on the beat. Da, 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 da. And then flipping the rhythm around creates a little bit of momentum, so that we're happy to hear it again rather than bored.
Right. Awesome. This has been so great. Anybody else? I'll give a second in case anyone else has a question. La, la, la. All right.
It's going to be in your head now.
This has been so good. So this will be available for you guys in the back in the Academy under the expert workshops. And you can go back to it anytime and go over all of these concepts and use them for yourself. Thanks so much, Diana, for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's always great to have our own Academy members on here and, focusing on their expertise. And, songwriting I've done it, but it's not my expertise. So it's great to have you here with some very specific, like I know all these things in my mind, but I'm not sure I could come out and say, okay, do this, this, and this. And that's what's so helpful of having kind of a roadmap to follow, and like you said, a toolkit to draw on. So thanks a lot.
You're very welcome. Thanks very much for having me. Great to see you guys, and I look forward to seeing you in the Academy.
Hold on a sec. Somebody's writing in the chat, and I want to make sure we don't, okay, they're just saying thank you. Let's see. I just really like, awesome. So there's some cool thank yous here in the chat, Diana, if you want to check those out.
Oh yeah, that's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, so I totally get not feeling well. Who is that? Who said that? Oh, Julie. Sorry about that. I don't actually feel well either. My daughter gave me a cold, so I can understand why you don't want to come on. But it's so great to have you guys here, and I will let you guys know when our next expert workshop is next month, and our next Q&A is next Friday at noon. So not tomorrow, but next Friday. So see you guys then.
Awesome.